Hello everyone, and welcome back to Victory at Sea Pacific US Campaign, Part 21. Okay, you're like, what the hell is going on? There was Part 20, and we bombed Japan and the game ended. Yes, you are correct. That did happen, and we're back at Iwo Jima with our Task Force 100, which has 21 carriers in it. 1 escort carrier, 11 battleships, 10 heavy cruisers, 4 light cruisers, 8 cruisers, 2 destroyer leaders, and 11 destroyers. And plus the 1 submarine. Um, the reason I'm doing this episode, which is basically I'm going to entitle as US Campaign and Game Review. So it's basically going to be an informal commentary and game review of Victory at Sea Pacific, and particularly the US campaign and what I've experienced so far, so that I could share it with anyone who wants to pick up this game, or anyone who is just playing the game already, and for the developers if they're listening to this, for tips, problems encounters, recommendations, and game feature improvements, and comments on the game in general. So what I did is I created myself just some bullet points that I'm gonna go through and just talk about the various points. And as I'm talking, I'm gonna try to see if I don't know. We'll probably just drive around with some ships, see if we can bomb anything, and I'll just point out the things as I go through. So the first thing is I would like to say is the game at the end of the campaign did not present a stats summary, which would have been something cool that I would suggest the developers to implement going forward. Just how many ships were sunk, or how many planes were shot down, how many tons of ships were taken out, or how many were lost, and everything. So I did keep a rough track of my losses, and they're actually pretty impressive. It's in total throughout the entire campaign, I've lost 4 ships and 10 subs, of which so the 10 subs I lost mainly due to not understanding sub mechanics in the beginning, being exposed when I shouldn't have been exposed, being detected and shot at. So that's as far as the 4 ships. I lost 3 DDs at the beginning because I had engaged all the DDs simultaneously against a fleet of 6 subs, and I couldn't multitask, and I didn't quite understand what I was doing anyways, so I lost 3 of the DDs in the process. After that, all my subsequent DD versus sub battles went very well. As far as the other 2 ships, one was a light cruiser, I think. I don't quite remember how I lost that one. I think it was because I wasn't paying attention either. And then the last ship, which was the biggest ship we lost, was a Baltimore class cruiser. It was right here, because I had basically my carrier fleet here on the east side of Formosa, and then I had the other group of, I think it was 2 battleships and 2 cruisers that encountered an enemy carrier at point blank range, and I couldn't do anything about it, and I couldn't be bothered to go into the combat view where the AA is improved compared to the map view, and so they ended up losing that one and almost lost the other cruiser too. So you could see pretty much my entire losses in the game, which were not very much, were due to either not understanding the game or just not caring or negligence. So everything, I could have literally not lost a single ship if I knew what I was doing, which is pretty impressive. And that's going to go into the balance and the types of units that I chose that are presented in this game. And if you choose the right units, you will basically not lose units. And I'll talk about that later. So overall impressions and summary of Victory at Sea Pacific. So Obviously, I think the game is great. It's a great game which has a ton of potential, and I'm gonna touch on that later. But the main things I noticed from the very beginning was, okay, you have got a campaign, but really once you do the campaigns, what you really need to get this game going if you want to survive long term, and would be to have multiplayer modes such as either a skirmish against other players or against the AI, where you make your own battles. A co-op mode would be nice for doing the campaign cooperatively with another player or another couple players that basically go and manage different task forces, and then you can simultaneously advance in different regions of the map. And the last would be a PvP, right? Um, Whether it's a PvP campaign mode or a PvP skirmish mode, those would be things that greatly enhance this game and make it really would make it shine. Um, Besides that, I think the two biggest negatives from the game so far have been the aircraft control bugs, which essentially made it, you know, almost impossible to control airplanes to the degree that one would need to have good tactical battles, right? Uh, and essentially, the biggest problem was planes not following your orders. Um, the the other thing was general game bugs like ships teleporting. When you're chasing a convoy, the convoy teleports to somewhere else, or ships teleporting onto land, or ships going onto land and not following the contours of islands, and things of that nature. Um, so then, moving on. Let's see here. Moving on, we have okay. Let's see. Talks about graphics and sounds real quick. And let me go here. What I was trying to do is get Task Force um, 100 to move up so I can out of the port so that I can look at it. Okay. All right. Here we are. Let's click on it. Near Iwo Jima. Since I'm talking about graphics and sound, uh, so the main comment here is obviously like the graphics are good in this game, but what I would say is it needs work. Like here we have a Yorktown class carrier or a Wasp class carrier. You know, just in general, like let's look at this Iowa for example. If you guys want to see what really good models look like, go to World of Warships. If you haven't heard about it, it's it's a 12 versus 12 player PvP naval action game, and they've got incredibly detailed, really nice models. So, having played that game for over 2 years, I'm kind of spoiled. But essentially, the graphics are okay, but it's just they would really add another dimension of immersion if these models were just a little bit better, right? Like the sea and everything, and the skies and the water effects are pretty decent, right? But the models themselves could use some improvement. Next, with sounds, I think they're just basic. They're very basic. The gun sounds are nice. Like if I take this guy and shoot. Sorry guys, right now it's lagging because there's just too many ships. And and the game just can't handle it. So like right now I'm clicking it, it's taking a few seconds. So right here you can see a bug, right? The turret obviously turned, but it's still showing going backwards, right? So things like that, polish. This game needs a lot of polish. So, and with that, like and I think over time, I think just like World of Warships has done, you can just keep improving the models, keep improving the animations, and this game will just get that much better. As far as game mechanics, let's talk about UI for a second. The UI is acceptable. It does the job. The only thing that I would say is right here, for example, we have a huge task force, right? And these are just the ships. They're grouped into 4 task groups. Once you start launching planes, you could literally have like 100 squadrons or wings. It gets overwhelming. So for smaller task forces of say up to 10 units, this model works okay. But anything more than that, I feel they need to do something to improve this so that you don't have a huge thing to scroll down and select. I think that's the main thing. Map view versus combat view. Here we've got the combat view and the map view. I think that what they've done is good. I think they both look good. The only thing there I'm going to touch upon later is that the mechanics and the balance changes from combat to map view. The most noticeable one being AA. AA is a 10 times stronger when you are in this view. Like if a bomber tried to attack me right now, this AA would rip them apart, no matter what comes through. Whereas if I went to map view, 1 or 2 bombers would always get through no matter what and damage my ships. So that's something that they need to work on. It's very annoying. They should have the same balance whether you are in one view or the other. Aircraft control I touched upon. I will touch later more detail. Then the next thing would be air compositions. So let's take out like an Essex class like the Intrepid. You can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So it's got 22 wings of, typically they're made of 3. So that would be 66 planes. An Essex class could carry up to 95 planes at the in a war. And so just to make that be kind of just a bit more realistic, I would have these be even more. Like just have those. So you would basically need to have 30 wings instead of 22 to have full SX class, right? So, but in order to do that, you would have to, I think, optimize everything. So you can see right now that it's having a lot of trouble, and I have a decent PC. I mean, it's a laptop, but I've got a decent PC. And it has trouble rendering that many ships on the screen. As far as ship and aircraft selection, I think they did a great job. They advertised over 100 units. I felt like every main unit that I ever cared about in the Pacific Theater has been represented. So no complaints there whatsoever. The one ship that I'm looking the most forward to is the Yamato. The Yamato class battleship, which I haven't seen yet while playing the US campaign, but I'm hoping in the Japanese campaign I'll be able to build several of them, and that's something I'm looking forward to. Now let's talk about game balance and difficulty. The game has 3 difficulty levels, which is easy, medium, and hard. I've played the US campaign in medium, and it was hardest at the beginning when there was overwhelming Japanese odds versus almost nothing in the US. And then, which is kind of historically accurate, but then the US essentially was able to produce a lot more, had a lot greater production capability, and eventually the tides turned because the US ended up having fleets like the one you're just seeing right now, um, whereas the Japanese had nothing. And many of their carriers, even in the game, did not even have planes to launch. Um, and the other thing is, towards the end, it became quite easy. I mean, with this task force, there's like literally nothing. Like I stopped my conquest of the Southwest Asia, just because it wasn't challenging anymore, right? Which is why I'm gonna play the Japanese campaign on hard difficulty, right? Uh, to 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 make it a bit more challenging. Um, as far as so learning curve and everything, um, they the devs did put up some good tutorial videos that are really nice, but I feel they could do a lot better as far as number of tutorials. They could have done, I think there's maybe 6 or 7 tutorial videos. They could have done like a good 20 or so, because they're very short, right? They're a couple minutes long, and they could have spared people who, um, like myself, like who had to learn things the hard way, right? Figuring things out, um, and I mean, thankfully there's YouTube and there's people that post videos, and you can learn um, by watching other people play. But I think it's something that they could have done, considering um, that there's a lot to figure out in this game, and a lot of things are buggy. So, all right, talking about balance. So, CVs are the most powerful unit in the game, and they should be, because they are what changed the war in the Pacific. And essentially, the only thing that can take out a CV right now is submarines, because they have no defense against them, or other aircraft, because they have quite insane range. So you can always keep away from surface ships, and a CV can counter anything except when they run out of planes. And the only time they run out of planes is if there's other planes that shoot them down, or AA. So the only counters to a CV is anti-aircraft fire, um, other planes, or subs. Now, one of the suggestions I would like to make to the devs is that CVs did have anti-submarine warfare capability, and that should be introduced into the game. A CV should be able to scout out and protect itself against submarines. Um, okay, now we talked about CVs, aircraft. Aircraft, we got fighters, we got fighter bombers, we got torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and level bombers. Uh, as far as all of these, I found they were okay. All of them were pretty good. The only thing that I didn't end up using is torpedo bombers. For the simple reason that, let's see if we can find a torpedo bomber. Yeah, right here. And the only reason I would not use a torpedo bomber is, so here, going back to the UI, look how much I have to scroll just to get to this Avenger. So these Avengers, they basically are just no good. Like, they get shot up very easily in AA, and the torpedo mechanics in this game are just no good. They're, you have to launch very far for them not to get shot down, or they're spread way too far. I don't know if you can change the spread. Oh, you can. Okay, maybe that's one of the problems. I should have changed the spread when I was bombing. But in general, I think it could use improvement, and they're not as effective as dive bombers. Let's try here to drop some torpedoes. Hopefully not drop them. You can drop them manually, and here you go. So, so I think that the main problem is because I never reduced the spread of torpedoes. I think if you reduce the spread, they could be very effective. As I said, the main problem here is they get shot up. If they actually made it through the flak, torpedoes can be quite devastating. So if they improve if they had improved the AA, I think they would be just fine. So the other thing would be strategic bombers. They were very buggy. The B-29 Super Fortresses, super exciting to have though, and super. They could actually change the course of the war a lot, and that's interesting. So these guys are actually circling in this location. I didn't know that. I thought they usually went back to their carrier when they were done with the last order. So it's pretty cool that they do that. That's the other thing. Like for example, in the map view, they return straight to the carrier, and in the combat view, you see they're just circling where I told them to just stay, which is the proper thing to do, because let's say you want to have a cap with fighters, you want them to stay in a certain region, do a certain patrol. So that's one of the things. They should make the map and the combat view consistent. Alright, the other thing is anti-submarine warfare ships like the Catalina, or sorry, planes. They were really good. They were the main method or weapon against submarines that came into too close, went past they just appear out of nowhere. So Catalinas were always there. The only way to get rid of them. Okay, now we talk about that anti-aircraft fire. The biggest problem with the anti-aircraft is that it doesn't work the same in map view as it does in combat view, essentially making AA a useless component of the game and completely making carriers overpowered in the map view. You will have noticed in the campaign, in the series, towards the end I just didn't bother anymore with smaller task groups to micromanage, and I would send like 6 carrier air groups to go attack a fleet of like 15 ships, and they could strike out the entire fleet with one raid, one attack. And that's because the AA is not as effective in map view. Whereas in the strategic view, you're able to shoot down a lot more. So that's something that, I mean, the whole reason, you see how the whole reason of having a force like this is your carriers are your main force, and everything else is there to defend your carriers. And then you wouldn't have to rely on fighters as much, and you could just let the enemy bombers come through. You wouldn't worry about it as much, and these guys would shoot up like most of the planes, right? And that's how it was historically. Historically, like you had to send like huge amounts of planes just to be able to hit targets, and if they got even close, that's because the AI would just murder them, right? So that's the AA part of it, and surface ship wise. So as I said this many times in my videos, in surface battles, there is only one rule right now in this game, and that's basically if you have bigger guns, you win. So right here we have the Clark, which is a destroyer, right? The Clark has no chance against aircraft by itself. It doesn't have chance against carriers. It doesn't have a chance against battleships, heavy cruisers, light cruisers, nothing. They will just outrange it, and if they're smart, they will kite it, and they have higher firepower. And even though that the game has a good mechanic where they're able to dodge some of the shells, it doesn't make enough of a difference, because eventually they will get hit and they will die. So I know they have smoke and stuff like that. I haven't tried using that, but the main problem here is they need to borrow from World of Warships, which does this a little bit better. They do it a little they're the other extreme. They're giving too much power to smaller ships. But the concept of concealment, um, a destroyer should be able to be a lot more concealable, a lot harder to detect than say a big capital ship, and be able to get in within torpedo range or something like that and torp, right? Right now you have no chance. The game, so they're not as the only good thing a destroyer is useful for is hunting submarines. That's the only reason you keep them, and maybe to add a little bit of AA if the destroyer has decent AA, which typically cruisers have better AA. So a destroyer, a cruiser is worth about 3 destroyers in terms of war bonds, and I mean, yeah, you could have a fleet of full of destroyers. I haven't. That's something I could test out. I will probably do some AA tests to see destroyer versus cruiser compositions, to see what shoots down the more aircraft. But my recommendation to the developers is introduce a concealment mechanic that allows smaller ships to be more stealthy and getting closer to the action. It would add a whole new dimension to the game and make these guys more valuable. Let's look at the next layer. Like let's say the like a cruiser, right? Let's click on this guy. A cruiser will just demolish anything that's smaller than it, but it has no chance against BBs, right? Again, why? Because BBs will outrange us. They have more firepower, and even though they might miss some shots, it doesn't matter. They have so much time to shoot that eventually they will get hits and they will sink it. And the Battle of Leyte Gulf in my series proved that. There was the USS Washington, which was able to defeat an entire force almost single-handedly of like about, I don't know, 8 destroyers and 5 cruisers by itself, because it outranged it. And the only thing that limited it was ammo. So if it ran out of ammo, it was the only reason that it would not win that engagement. See, that kind of defeats the purpose. That seems to be a little too powerful. I don't think a battleship could take on a 15 ships by itself. There's, you know, that mechanic just needs to be a little bit tuned. They need to be balanced a bit. Again, the main thing for cruisers should be concealment. They should be able to not be seen as easily when coming in and facing, say, a battleship, because they're smaller, right? And same idea as the DD. And that would give them more of a chance. Or you have to increase the A so much that they actually become really useful to have around task groups, so that at least there is a reason for them to be there, and then you don't have to rely on having so many carriers. You can just have one carrier who's very well defended, and then you don't have to worry about having so many fighters to protect your carrier and things of that nature. And the last thing I guess would be submarines. With regard to submarines, it took me a while to learn the mechanics. I think they're pretty good. They're implemented pretty well. It seems like the main tactic is to have at least 2 submarines where one is surfaced or at periscope depth to be able to detect the enemy, and then the other one is submerged and get closer and then do an attack on the capital ship. I don't know if that was a valid tactic. I think submarines were able to remain undetected even at periscope depth. I think they have to improve the detection, the stealth of the submarine at periscope depth a little bit, but otherwise I think overall they did a good job with submarines. The other thing that it really annoyed me is that the US subs would have 6 torps in front and 4 in the back, and they would launch all 6 at once and then they would be done. They could do anything. Whereas the Japanese could launch 1 at a time and be effective, have more control. So please, Evil Twin Artworks, please allow US submarines to launch 1 submarine at a time, just like the Japanese. It'll make things a lot better. and submarines had I think up to 18 torpedoes. So why are you giving them only 10 torpedoes? Just one per launcher. So give them the extra torpedoes that they actually had historically. Okay, as far as campaign and historical accuracy, now let's go back to the map view to talk about this. Uh, that was one of the things I really liked about this game. It allows people who are enthusiastic about the Pacific theater to relive history. Not only relive like the historical battles, like the Battle of Midway, you know, and you know, assaulting Truk and assaulting Rabaul and all this other stuff, right? Iwo Jima and Philippines, all these great historical battles. It allows you to actually change history a little bit. You know, when I nuked Japan, I missed my bomb on Hiroshima, which was a nice. You know, you can say, oh yeah, you know, Enola Gay actually screwed up and missed the bomb. You know, and then that type of stuff is really nice. Or having the ability to nuke like other parts of Japan and have them react differently, um, or do different things. You know, like the ability to take the war as it happened through history, or to do it in a different way. I think that's the big strength of this game. It really allows you to relive those moments with historically accurate like ships and units and names and everything. Speaking of names, one thing that I've seen a lot of people complain about is ship naming. A lot of the ships are getting same names, both on the Japanese and the US side, and that's something they really have to fix. There's a lot of ships in the US Navy and in the Japanese Navy, and they should never have two ships with the same name. It detracts from the immersion. Um, it's really something when you see a historical ship and you have all of these historical ships that are unique that you control. Um, that's what you want to see. You don't want to see like 15 Lexingtons in the game. Bugs and issue. Okay, so the main issue with the game is, I would say, the number one is um, number one and two would be the slow UI response, especially with aircraft control. So let's say, I mean, right now it's lagging because there's just so many units. But let's say I send, um, you know, this flight of bombers, right? See, right here, these bombers are actually still circling, right? Let's say I send them like here. See, for example, I just asked them to go here to the northwest, and they didn't. And they went back. That's a perfect example, right? All of these little bugs. Like if I asked, you need precision in this game if you want to be able to have a lot of fun and a lot of challenging battles. Like what I'm asking this bomber to go here, and then as soon as it goes there, it's gonna try to turn back. No, you should circle around there. Like that's where I told you to go. You need to circle, and you need to stick there. You need to. But like, look, I'm pretty sure as soon as it goes there, it's gonna go back to the carrier. Or maybe not. I thought they did that a lot of times in the campaign. Okay, that's actually good. Um, so the point is, a lot of times they don't do what you ask them to do, and that's where that was one of the biggest issue. And you want to be able to give these guys very rapid controls. You want them to be very responsive because you're gonna have a lot of things happening in the battle. You don't want to be having units that don't do what you're saying, right? That's the main issue. I talked already about the map view versus combat view and how it changes the actual balance of the game. See right now? There you go. I did not tell it to go back to the carrier. I asked it to like stay here, right? Anyways. The other issues, things like ships teleporting across the sea, or onto the land, or not being able to follow land contours. Those are big issues that they should fix that really mess up the game. Another big problem was ships docked at a yard. As you could see in the beginning of the game, I couldn't even see my ship docked there, and planes have huge trouble trying to land and take off when ships are docked. You should either not allow them to take off and land, or do something. Like, the game has no idea what to do when ships are on the docked, and they don't know what doesn't know where to place them, and a slew of other things. So they need to really improve that. Uh, and then the last thing for me would be the the lag that I'm experiencing right now is because of this huge task force. Um, I think one of the great things about this game should be like that you're able to have all the biggest task forces that you want, and have like this task force should be able to face another task force with 20 Japanese carriers, right? And have this massive battle, and hundreds of planes in the air, and this epic battle. And then that's where micromanagement, UI, and responsiveness comes in. They need to be able to improve that before they can do that, and optimize the game so you can do that. Right now, this is too big. This task force is way too big. It's way too slow. Like, look at that. It's not responsive, and the only way to have a good gameplay is to have one of these task forces alone, uh, doing its own thing. You can't have too many planes. I found even having 4 carriers in a task group is pushing it. And I can't just send all the planes up because it slows the game down and everything. Uh, okay, improvements on current features and mechanics. One of the main things I would suggest, and others have suggested as well, is controlling of these convoys. You should have two options. One is let them do what you want, have them do exactly what they're doing, and go automatically, and not have to deal with them. But if a player, for example, if I need these convoys to go to Iwo Jima now instead, I should be able to tell them to go to Iwo Jima, and then they will go there, drop their thing, and then they can continue their automatic AI dictated routes. But I should be able to tell where they should go or pick up things if I want to or need to. And the other thing is, I should have an oiler that is able to go with the task force. The Enterprise and the Yorktown and all these carriers always had an oiler with them, that traveled with the task force and constantly refueled. They need to implement that. Already talked about the optimization on larger units and concealment for DDs and subs. And I think those are the main points, guys. The other thing here, I'm going to just start to conclude, is my bias against this on this game, why I love it despite all the bugs. First of all, there is no game quite like it. I actually was at one point playing with Unity to create my own game, and this is something quite similar to the game that I was actually my dream game of creating a naval World War II battle focused on carriers and carrier versus carrier battles. Like, that was my dream game that I was actually building because it didn't exist, and now this came out. So imagine my bias towards this game to make wanting it to work, right? It's the closest thing to it is Battle Stations Midway and Battle Station Pacific, uh, which is quite similar to this. And the only difference there is that you can actually take control directly of each of the units in first person or third person, I guess. Like, I think you can go into the cockpit of like a plane or something like that and manually control it. But it's the same concept, and it is one of the most popular and beloved games of all time. That one, right? For what it achieved. It gives games like this give you such freedom to do whatever you want in any type of ship or any type of plane, any type of unit, and such freedom in both the tactical view that gives you all the action and the strategic to control the overall unit production and everything, right? So as far as my wish list, I guess, for the future, it's quite simple. I would like a multiplayer skirmish mode that basically allows you to to go against either other PvP players or to go against AI. Kind of like StarCraft and all of those, right? Like any RTS has the um, Company of Heroes. All of these games have the ability, besides the main campaign, to go in and just go for the go for a quick game, and just customize it. The other thing would be multiplayer co-op, basically having these campaigns and have, say, I'm taking care of the Wasp here and this battle group, and my buddy is taking care of that group right there, and then I have another buddy that's taking care of that group, right? And then you can like collaborate. You can say, okay, you go and you defend Okinawa, you go scout here, or you go to the southwest and be the General MacArthur and be the commander of the southwest region, and you be Halsey or and command the Pacific region, and things of that nature. The other thing would be multiplayer PvP. So have one person be the IGN and the other person be US Navy, and have them go at each other. The game is already set up to do that, so why not just allow them to do that, right? It would be epic. Sorry guys here. The other thing, besides that, sorry, I'm just trying to pull back my points here. I just closed it by accident. Just hang in there for a second, guys. Forgive me. Okay, the next thing would be a mission and campaign designer. Kind of like another game I'm interested in. I'm into flight sims and simulations. Is DCS World, military simulation. I mean, there's entire groups that all they do is create missions and campaigns, and they go and fly them, right? So having the ability to create your own campaigns, your own stories, or even your own missions, and then have a jump in with your buddy and just go at it, or do a PvP. All those things are things that would extend the lifespan of this game by years. It'll be years of limitless gameplay that you can do. Right now you've got the 3 campaigns, and that's great, but if the game is to survive, first you got to fix the bugs, make the gameplay even better, and then create these other modes. And then mods. If people wanna put in mods and turn this into a let's say a modern naval combat game with Ticonderoga cruisers and nuclear Nimitz class carriers and the Ohio class subs and whatever, have basically have the ability to launch missiles and phalanx and everything, and have the same thing with a map of, say, the same map but in modern warfare, and have basically a modern version of this, which would be great, with all the modern ships and essentially having a missile technology, right? And that's it, guys. My last thing here is just my thoughts on the IGN campaign. What I am hoping, it's going to be quite interesting, because the whole premise of the game was that the US was weak in the beginning and the IGN were strong, but the US, as Admiral Yamamoto feared or knew about, had a huge production advantage. Like they could produce like 10 times the ships that the Japanese could in a year, right? So Admiral Yamamoto, which was the Japanese commander of the combined fleet, he knew, right? He knew that if you had to win the war, you had to win it decisively, quickly, which is why he did the attack on Pearl Harbor and why he went after Midway, and why he wanted to just kill all the carriers as soon as possible. Like, if the carriers were taken out at Pearl, there wasn't much that was standing in the Japanese way, right? Like, I'm reading a book right now that recounts in detail the what happened in the Pacific theater, and like, for example, the British, right, and the Allies in the West, they were very weak, The Japanese tactics, for example, the Ryujo, which just had which is a light carrier with just a couple cruisers with it, was able to kill like 10 ships in one day, right? Um, which historically was insane, because they only had something like 16 bombers or something on it. Um, so so yeah, I'm interested to see, like the Japanese will have a lot of number superiority, I assume, and they will, but they'll have a lot of fronts to defend, whereas the U.S. only had Midway and Johnston and and Hawaii to defend. Like, whereas on one front, right, and they had all the supplies that were kind of safe from behind the enemy, the front lines. Whereas the Japanese have the British on the west, and the Australians in the south, and the US in the east, and the Russians in the north, and the Chinese in the west, and they're just surrounded all over the place, right? So, uh, concentration of units is not going to work as well. It's going to be all about effective task force compositions and positioning, and making sure you have task forces ready to defend at any point, because you don't know where the enemy is going to be. And I think recon is going to be a big thing, because you have to know where the enemy is and what their composition is. So I think one thing I'm going to improve in my gameplay is just sending out the subs again, like I did, more use of the subs, but also smaller task forces, like the Japanese did, like in this campaign, having just a couple EDs or a couple subs, just go out and scout and just try to raid, and then if there's no opposition, great, and if you lose a couple ships, try to retreat. If not, at least you know they're there, right? And then you can route your forces there. So that's it, guys. Those are my thoughts, and so yeah, stay tuned for the IGN campaign as we take a look at this great sunset of Task Force 100, or basically our Task Force 58. Let's try to get a good shot here. Is there anything west of here? Yeah. Look at that. The Lexington in the background, the Essex in the foreground. And our mighty fleet sailing ahead. Oh. Beautiful, beautiful, guys. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the campaign. And see you all on the Japanese campaign.